Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to all the students and teachers who are joining us virtually. I'm so glad you're here with us for our conversation with artist Roberto Lugo. My name is Rebecca Singer, and I work as a museum educator at Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens in Washington, D.C. That's the place you see here in this picture. And I'm so pleased to be joined virtually by artist Roberto Lugo today. Roberto Lugo lives and works in Philadelphia. He is an artist, social activist, spoken word poet, and educator. And today we'll be looking at his work as a ceramic artist, which means an artist who makes things from clay. Welcome, Roberto.
Hello, thank you. Welcome. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, we're very excited to get to talk to you today. So there are, as you know, of course, there are currently 7 of your artworks displayed at Hillwood as part of an exhibition that's called The Luxury of Play. And we can see these artworks here in this picture. There are teapots and vases that you've made. I see 3 teapots on the top row here, and then 4 vases down here on the bottom. And when I look at your art here, one of the first things that I notice is that you put a lot of people's faces on the art. So I'd love to know more about what draws you to including portraits of people on your pieces.
Yeah, well, I think growing up in Philadelphia, uh, I didn't have any art classes growing up. And so most of my interpretation and experience with art took place in seeing the mural arts program in Philadelphia, and all of the murals that were around the city. And a lot of those murals were portraits. Um, when I started to work in clay, I was really influenced by decorative European art, and a lot of the porcelain and objects that I was looking at had these vignettes, these faces on the side of the pieces, where they would generally paint a portrait of someone. And that's really the sort of the basis for which I do that. I also just aesthetically, I love the way that it looks. I love the opportunity to pay homage to someone, and think about the people that have paved the way for me to be where I am.
Great. So I actually have a quote here from you that I'm going to read back to you, your own words, that talks a little bit about this inspiration you've talked about putting people's pictures on your art. You are quoted as saying, "I imagine how much the world could change for a child who walks through the doors of a museum and sees a portrait of someone who looks like them on a piece of pottery." I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about what this means to you and more about how you choose who you put on your art.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the conversation, in any conversation, I mean, I think one of the ways that it tends to come up nowadays most often is through race, but there's also a lot of different types of representation that I think are important. But one of the things is that historically, uh, there's, especially when we look at American art or the American museum, um, there's a focus on one type of voice, which is white male, and there's nothing wrong with being a white man. I just, one of the things that I really want is to um, have more expanded dialogue, and that comes through having different kinds of people as makers, having different kinds of people featured in different kinds of stories. And for a student or a person going to a museum, if you there's something really intriguing about seeing a story that's different than yours, which I think is very purposeful. But at the same time, if you never see something that matches or is in dialogue with your experience, whether that be through pictures of people that look like you or stories like the ones that you grew up in, what happens is you kind of feel like that medium or that field whatever it is, in this case, it's art, is not for you. And so I find so many situations, um, people of color don't see other people of color in art as artists or their stories told, and so you know they're not going to museums in the same way as people who are represented are. And so I think it's really important because one of the things that it does is it also supports other people who might be interested in art. Because if you don't see yourself reflected in other artists and in the stories that are being told through art, then you don't feel like there's any future for you in it. And so we kind of just continue this cycle of one type of voice constantly having the soapbox.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's very, very thoughtful. And we can see here how you've really expanded the story of who is being, whose stories are being shared on art. Now, besides people's faces, I also see a lot of bright colors and patterns on your artwork. And I noticed some words that look a little bit like graffiti here as well. So this picture we're looking at right now is a vase that you have made that's called Good Trouble, which Hillwood actually recently purchased and is currently on display at our museum. Could you tell us a little bit more about the words and the designs that we are looking at on this vase?
Sure. So, the person that's um, put on this piece is John Lewis on this side, and one of the biggest sort of I don't know exactly how you would.
I think we may have lost Roberta for a moment. Please bear with us while.
Just one moment. Yeah, I apologize. My internet is having trouble. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you all right now.
Okay, great. So I grew up doing graffiti, and that was really my first art form. And one of the things is that I see graffiti as um, an art form. I see it as a form of resilience because I think a lot of times people do graffiti because they don't have access to other art forms. And it's very visceral. It doesn't take, in terms of, getting started, it doesn't take very much. And, the whole world is really a canvas. And so that's how I started. And I look at graffiti as a pattern. I look at graffiti as a form of, um, or a remnant of a culture that I grew up in. And so a lot of times when I'm decorating a pot, I'll also include graffiti because I feel like it's one of the few forms of pattern, few forms of drawing and illustration that represent where it is that I'm from. And, John Lewis used to talk about good trouble. And one of the reasons why is because, not all laws are just. For the most part, laws are put in place to protect us and to, have an agreed upon way of life. But, if you look at life in the United States before the 60s, Black and white people were still segregated. And there's a lot of things that Black Americans couldn't do. And so to protest that, I mean, those are things that were laws. And so in order to have a more equitable world, you needed to protest that. And by protesting that, you might get into trouble. And for John Lewis, and I think we can all agree, looking back, that it's a good form of trouble, standing up for something you believe in that you know is right, even though it might not be legal, is sort of one of the things that I really carry, that message that I really carry into my work.
Great, thank you for sharing more about that, the quote that's on the vase and what inspires your use of graffiti art on the vases and on the art that you create. It's great to hear about that background and experience that leads to these designs.
Mm-hmm.
So now we've talked a little bit about the designs that we see on your vases and your teapots and your artwork. I'd love to talk a little bit now more about the process of how you create these pieces. You are a potter, which means you make your art out of clay. And perhaps some of the students in the audience with us have experience working with clay before, or perhaps not. But clay is, of course, a natural material. It's made up of really tiny bits of rock, so tiny that you can't even tell that it's from rock. It's sort of like mud or dirt, but it becomes soft and sticky when it's mixed with water. And then, of course, when it dries, it hardens and holds its shape. So to make one of your vases or teapots, you first have to make the shape out of the clay. And I've got a 1-minute video here of you doing just that. So let's watch together this video and we're going to see your process at work.
And no one seems to care. When you're down and feeling hurt, and no one seems to care. And feeling hurt.
Oh, sorry.
One seems to care. And feeling hurt. When tears fill your eyes. When tears fill your eyes. When tears fill your eyes. When tears.
So it's really fascinating to watch the clay take shape as you work with it. I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit about what we saw you doing here in this video.
Sure, yeah. This process is called throwing. You don't actually throw any clay. You should look up where the actual term derives from, but essentially we take moist clay, which is clay mixed with water, so it's sort of like a putty, and we wedge it, which is very similar if you've ever kneaded dough in your kitchen. And the wedging process takes out some of the air, and it makes the clay really uniform. And then we put it on this wheel, and the wheel allows it to spin. So the first part of throwing is called centering. And centering is really important because it's where you put your hands on the clay. You keep your hands very steady so as the clay that's on the wheel creates one solid uniform shape. And when you're able to do that, every time you touch the pot, any part that you touch, it has the same effect on the piece all the way around because it's spinning. And so what I'm doing here is I'm taking that hunk of clay and I'm making it hollow by putting my hands inside of it. And then I'm making it thinner and thinner by pulling some of the clay that's thicker at the bottom of the pot and pulling it upwards. And then the last thing I'm doing here is shaping it. And shaping is usually where you decide what type of pot it's going to be, whether it's going to be a vase or ewer or some other shape. In this particular case, I made a vase out of it.
Great. And that's a great description of the process we just saw here. What do you enjoy about working with clay?
I think it's physical and like manual. I like that part of it. I like the work element to it. I like the tangibility of it, that like at the end of throwing, you have something to show. And I think that's really important for me as a person, to like have something to show for my life, to feel like I existed, and to create these ceramic objects that'll last for thousands of years. For me, it's really rewarding every time I get to throw and make pottery, because it feels like I'm here, and it feels like I did something that day, and here are the remnants of that.
That makes a lot of sense, and it sounds like a very meaningful process and experience. There's of course many steps that are involved in creating the pottery. So you need to shape the clay, which we just talked about and saw you doing in the video. But then after you shaped it and it's had time to dry, in order for it to hold its shape, it needs to be heated in a kiln, which is like a really large oven for baking clay. And in the center picture here, we see an image of some pottery being heated in a kiln. So the kiln heats the clay at very high temperatures, so it becomes hard and holds its shape. But I imagine that the clay can become fragile when it gets heated in the kiln. And I imagine many of us are wondering, how often do the things you're working on break? And that seems like that could be a pretty frustrating experience. So what do you do if that does happen?
Yeah, I mean, there's different levels of breaking. Like if you're working on a sculpture and it has a crack in it, but the whole thing is mostly together, I don't really view that in the same way I think a lot of ceramic artists do. I still think that thing is valuable. It's a piece. It's an artwork. I think when something explodes and it's in 1,000 pieces, it's really difficult to recover from there. But there's a lot of learning. For me, the more that I work in clay, the less and less issues that I have with breaking. I still have some cracking, especially when I work on larger pieces, but I tend to adapt to that and mend, repair certain pieces if I feel like it's needed. But for me, the part of putting a piece in the kiln is really exciting because it's kind of a mystery in terms of what you're going to get as a result of it. And I like that. I like there being parts that I know how they're going to work out, and I like parts where I don't know how they're going to work out.
That's so interesting to know that, it's got that element of surprise in it for you, which is great. And that it also sounds like incorporating happy accidents, as we like to call them, and in my household is an important part of the work too, and kind of taking what
Yes.
you get and making the most of it. That
Yes,
seems like a
absolutely.
great lesson. Let's see. So in addition to being an artist, you're an educator, meaning that you teach students to create art from clay. And we see a photo of you here. I'll describe a few of the things I'm noticing in it that others might be as well. I see there's this huge vase behind you. It looks like it's probably as tall as you are. Looks like it's maybe not quite finished yet, a work in progress, right? And there are a lot of tables and work tables and stools around, like a place for people to do work, and maybe some more art materials and works in progress here. So I'm wondering if this is maybe your studio or your workspace in the college where you teach, and if you could tell us a little bit about what's going on in this photo.
Sure. Yeah, this is the Glaze Lab at Tyler School of Art, which is where I'm a professor. And this is Tyler School of Art is part of Temple University. And the vase you see behind there, yeah, it's just one step away from being completed. And the vase itself is about the size of me. And how I got the shape of it was by tracing my body and then trying to create a pot that fit that shape. And so that's why the shape looks and is the scale that it is.
That's really interesting. And yeah, the scale, you can kind of see how that matches up with your height. That's great to see the work that is in progress. And it sounds like this is a place where you do work with young artists at the college where you work. What do you think makes clay a good material for young artists to work with?
Well, I mean, I think clay is really versatile. I think clay, it can be turned into anything. So whether or not you want to work sculpturally, if you like painting, you can paint on clay, which is something I do. I think clay is also functional, meaning you can make a lot of things that you can use and be with every day, which I think is a really beautiful thing. So I have the opportunity to create things for other people. And it's also, I think, a way to solve problems, like things that you wish you could see in the world, you can create with clay. So it's a really rewarding material.
It's a beautiful idea. That it's a way to problem solve and create. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think so.
yeah. I'm sure we have some students in the audience who might like to be artists themselves. So I was wondering if you could maybe tell us a little bit about the story, your story of how you became an artist, and also what advice you would give to a child who wants to become an artist.
Yeah, I mean, my story is a bit unorthodox in that I think I started going to school for art at the age of 25, and it was really a lot of chance, meaning I knew I wanted to try going to college for something, and I just took a class, and I was really drawn to art. It seemed like something that I was capable of. It worked in the way that my mind worked. And up to that point, I hadn't really found anything that operated in that way, and I just got really excited about every class. I got excited about working on a piece again, about having time to make art. And so, it's amazing to see where it's taken me. In terms of advice, I think one of the things that often gets told to people is that art is kind of something that you do on the side. You do something else as your livelihood, and while that may be true for a lot of people, I think everybody, uh, you know, art doesn't, and having a career in life in art doesn't have to look one particular way. Which I think is one of the faults of how we look and talk about art is people often think you either have to be a professional artist who lives off of your artwork, meaning you sell your artwork and you're going to make a living off of it, or you're an educator, which is also a great way to be a part of art. But there's a lot of people who do a lot of other things in between, and I think like art can adapt to the individual person and how is it they like to work. And so I really think that art can be a lucrative career in that way. Maybe not lucrative in terms of making tons of money, but lucrative in terms of like finding a life that has a balance where you enjoy the thing that you get to do.
That's another great message about finding your own path and finding something that excites you and works for you. I really appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yes.
So yeah, I want to thank you for the time you've taken to talk with us so far today. And for all this great information you've shared with us. And I've really enjoyed learning more about your process and about your art. But now what I'd really like to do is invite the students who are joining us today to ask you their questions. So teachers or students can open the webinar Q&A box to type their questions, and then just, of course, click the send key in the box. And we will do our best to answer as many questions as we can in the time we have right now. So I'll invite folks to add any questions they may have. And while we're waiting for some questions to come up, I'll actually start us off by asking if you could share what is maybe the most challenging project that you've worked on, or if not the most challenging, one of the challenging projects.
I mean, I think I keep escalating in terms of taking on challenging things. Right now, I'm working on a piece. I can show it to you over here. So I can flip my camera. I don't know if you can see it over there, but it's a 20-foot tall vase. And so, that took a team of people to work on over at the Atelier, which is next to Grounds for Sculpture, which is where I have a residency right now. And, it took a lot in terms of a group of people to paint it, a group of people to build it. And, even to right now, we're still installing stairs, and there's so many facets to it. And, never really had anything that I couldn't do completely myself. Not that I do everything myself, but that I'm at least capable of it. In this case, I really had to rely on other people. So that was a challenge. I'm also working larger scale in terms of my pottery, which is a challenge, because you have to deal with a lot more intangibles that you don't think of, and things that just kind of come up.
Great. So I've got a couple of questions in from some students now. We're going to start with Ms. Ruth's class has asked, when did you start liking art?
I think I always liked art. As a kid, I liked drawing. I don't think there was a huge support system for it, meaning like, it just seemed like kind of doodles because, there wasn't really a community of people that were doing art as artists, or people that like call themselves artists, or would claim that for themselves. And so, I think that's an important part of things. It's like not just like having that interest, but then also having that interest nurtured through having access to it in school, which it sounds like a lot of the students here do have access. I mean, any access is good. There's always something to complain about, right? In terms of like, I don't have this, I don't have that, I don't have ceramics in school. My school is terrible because of that, but it's all in context. Like I remember one time I went to volunteer in a school in Kansas, and this one student that was walking me to the classroom told me that his school was ghetto. And I was walking to the ceramics room, and they had a kiln bigger than the kiln that we had in college. The fact that they even had an art program, and they had one of the best art programs I've ever seen, and the school was anything but ghetto, but you sort of convince yourself and talk yourself into this, and so I think for me, I was a person who had to persevere, and even though I didn't have access, still figure out a way to find myself, and I'm glad and fortunate that I found myself. But I think that's an important part that I was able to figure out, but I wasn't able to figure it out until I was in my mid-20s.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. Here's another question we've got about wondering if you ever use any of the objects you make, if they're just for display, or if you ever use them for their function. For instance, the teapots, do you ever use those for tea?
Yes, my work does get used. One of the things that's kind of challenging about my work is it's very time consuming. Like if somebody buys a teapot, it's something that I made completely by hand. It's something that I painted completely by hand. And so, and then I don't have a ton of time because I'm also a professor and a father. And so my work, they ask, the asking price for my work isn't normally something that somebody would buy a piece and then take it home and use it, because it's an investment. It's not cheap, and so generally people don't use them. But personally, I view it and interact with my work in a much different way because it's mine. So I do use them. I also make a run of functional things every month. Maybe not necessarily the teapots, which are functional, if somebody wanted to use them, but I make cups every month that are available to the public. Next month I'm making pitchers. Last month I made small jars and coffee pour overs, and all of these things are things that people can use in their home.
That's great that these are things we can use every day or put on display. Here's another question about a student, again from Ms. Ruth's class, is asking, how do you feel when you make your art?
Well, it's not like a uniform feeling, but there's a sense of familiarity. A lot of times that kind of like this excitement that I get to where like I haven't really had it since I was a kid. Like when you're young, you think about all these things you want to do when you're about to go to sleep. Like you're excited about the next day, about seeing people in school, about this event or that event. And as you get older, you have less and less of those moments. And I think art, sometimes I get tired of it, just like everybody gets tired of everything because it becomes work. Um, but then there's these moments where, like today, I was just painting a teapot and I got really excited about it. And I haven't been excited about painting something for a while. And so my emotions and how I feel when I'm making artwork vary. I think they vary depending on how I feel in my life, whether or not I'm depressed or I'm happy or I'm hopeful. All these things kind of challenge, and then art sometimes can be a response to that. Sometimes if I'm depressed, art can be a way for me to get my mind off of things. If I'm happy, art can kind of just feels like it compounds that and just adds more joy to the process. But to be honest, my emotions and how I feel when I'm making art vary greatly depending on how I feel as a person.
That makes a lot of sense. I think it's maybe some that us non-artists don't always think about all the different emotions you could be feeling when you do your art. There are actually several questions here, but one I think relates a little bit to part of what you were just talking about how you feel when you were doing this art. Have you ever overcome artist's block? Like, have you ever had a time when you like writer's block, but for an artist, you just weren't quite sure what to create and you had to overcome that?
Well, I have had many challenges, but artist block is not has not been one of them. And I attach that to the fact that my art is such a response to my life. And as long as I'm living, I'm always going to have something to make work about. And I see everything now as an opportunity for an artwork. It's like, I feel like I have a responsibility to my culture and to my community when I see things in the news, when I live and experience things, that I have a voice to be able to say something and do something about it. And so I just think that I don't really get the time to stop and think to myself, well, what do I do and say next? Because it's so wrapped into who I am. But other people that might have writer's block might also have other things that I don't have. I think that's one of the things that people don't realize. It's like we all have, some things that we are challenged with, but we all have gifts that other people don't. Like I'm not a very detail-oriented person. I don't have a lot of patience, which are all important virtues for being an artist. So, and things that might take somebody a few minutes might take me a day, and vice versa. So it's one of those things where as you keep making, you realize things that your strengths are. I mean, some areas you're challenged in, and you just become more comfortable with both of those things.
Excellent. That makes a lot of sense. I think we still have time for a couple of more questions. So I'm going to ask one or two more that have come in here. There's a question about the pandemic and how that has that at all affected your work or your art or your flow or process?
Yeah, I mean, when the pandemic initially happened, it significantly impacted my life because I had moved away to Italy for 6 months. I was doing an artist residency, and 2 weeks in, the pandemic happened, and I didn't have any housing. I left my house before I left to Italy, and we just kind of like moved around from place to place, and I didn't really have a studio because I had planned to be on the studio for 6 months. So it was really difficult to figure out a way to make art, and it was also difficult to find inspiration. But with all great challenges, there's also some gifts that come along with that for me. I think one of the things is the pandemic made me realize how to be appreciative of the career that I have in art. And, you know, having it taken away from me for a while made me realize, like, man, I better use this while I still have it, you know? So
Thanks for sharing that. Again, I think I have time for one or two more. So here is a question from a class. What is your favorite piece of art that you've made?
I think probably the piece I just showed you, the 20-foot tall vase that's here, that has 2 sets of stairs. I think like one of the things that I like about creating artwork is to create experiences and things where it's not about me, it's about the viewer. And in this particular piece, it's made for people to be able to walk inside and take a picture of themselves inside of the piece. And that's important for me because it's like people being able to literally see themselves reflected in the artwork. And that's kind of the experience that I'm trying to set up. And I think this piece is successful with that.
That is a truly amazing piece. 20 feet tall, you said? Is that?
Yes.
Wow. And when that is, it's still in process, right? Or have you completed it?
No, it's opening on Friday here at Grounds for Sculpture. So Grounds for Sculpture is in New Jersey, and the official opening is on the 22nd. So after the 22nd, people will be able to come here to Grounds for Sculpture in New Jersey and walk in to the piece and see it in person.
It sounds like a pretty amazing experience. I'm going to wrap us up with one last question. So this is a question about process again, but about how you take an idea from beginning to end. So when you know what your idea for a project is, what is your process to bring that idea to life?
You know, I think I don't think too much. You know, I usually just start, and I've kind of kept my process pretty improvisational because of that, meaning like that I don't try to know what the entire thing will look like. And I also set myself up by doing that so I don't get disappointed with how things look. Because I think if you kind of plan everything out, it's never going to quite look like what it did in your head. You know, at least it doesn't for me. So I would say that like there's this quote by Chuck Close that something about, you know, how much time it takes to plan an artwork, but it says that the rest of us just get to work. And I think that's important to, like, you know, not overthink, not worry too much about what other people are going to think about a piece, but just to go in on it, and you know you'll see what it's supposed to be in the end.
Great. So being kind of very open and flexible to the process. Well, I think that about brings us to our conclusion here. So I want to thank you, Roberto, for being here and answering all our questions. And thank you also to everyone who is joining us. We invite you to continue exploring art and gardens with Hillwood. You can visit our website at hillwoodmuseum.org for information about virtual field trips. And teachers, be sure to check out our new Portraits on Porcelain virtual field trip, which highlights Roberto Lugo's Good Trouble vase that we saw toward the beginning of this program. So thank you again, Roberto, and thank you to all of you teachers and students in the audience, and I hope we'll see you at Hillwood soon. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Goodbye, all.